Try this one simple trick and watch how people bow down to respect you. Most people walk into a room and disappear. They're present, but they don't register. They smile, but no one remembers. They speak, but their words dissolve like mist, leaving no trace, no weight. Why? Because they carry the energy of seeking validation, instead of the energy that forces others to calibrate. This world doesn't operate on fairness. It operates on first impressions, on perception, not substance. You're not evaluated by what you bring to the table, but by how others feel about your presence before you've even opened your mouth. Think of Napoleon Bonaparte. He was never the loudest voice in the room, but when he walked in, conversations halted. People leaned forward, waiting for a glance, not a speech. Or Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor philosopher. Each night, he wrote to himself, "If you do not master your own mind, someone else will." And look at Elon Musk. It's not his charisma that captures the room, it's the pause. He answers questions with long silences, painfully long, and in those seconds of silence, he makes it clear. He's not performing, he's choosing. Here's the brutal truth. Society doesn't respect those who chase approval. It respects those who grant value to themselves first. This isn't about arrogance. It's about energy. And the energy of stillness, of deliberate silence, is louder than any performance. Now picture this. You walk into a meeting, not like before where you smiled a little too quickly, nodded a little too often, and spoke just fast enough to be agreeable. This time, you say nothing. You sit. Your posture is still. Your gaze, unbothered, controlled. Someone throws a question your way. You don't answer. Not immediately. You pause. 2 seconds. 3. No fidgeting, no blinking, just silence. The tension in the room thickens. Eyes shift. People lean in because now they want to hear what you have to say. And in that moment, something subtle but permanent happens. You're no longer being evaluated. You're being adjusted to. You didn't dominate by force. You did it by restraint. In human psychology, the person who creates tension is the one in control. The one who forces others to wait automatically rises above them. They'll never say it out loud, but you've just rewritten your identity in their eyes. Not as someone who pleads to be heard, but as someone whose silence demands attention. That's the shift. From being tolerated to being taken seriously. And all it took was the power of one well-timed pause. Machiavelli didn't believe in magic. He believed in control, especially the kind you can't see. And when it comes to controlling perception, nothing is more powerful than strategic silence. Because silence, when used right, doesn't just fill the room, it bends it. Let me show you how. In every social encounter, there's a hidden negotiation happening. Who's leading and who's following? Who speaks first? Who reacts faster? Who tries to explain more? And the truth is harsh. The person who rushes to speak usually ends up being framed as weaker, not because they're less intelligent, but because speed signals desperation. That's why the great ones never rush. Julius Caesar was known for his terrifying calm. In the Senate, when insulted by political enemies, he often responded with long silences. No defense, no anger, just a calculating stare. That silence did more than any argument ever could. It sent a message. You don't control the tempo. I do. That's the heart of cold strategy. Tempo control. When you speak slowly and pause deliberately, you don't just communicate confidence, you enforce it. Think of Steve Jobs during his iconic product reveals. He didn't speak fast. He paused. Let the crowd feel the weight of his silence before saying a word. Because power isn't in the sentence. It's in the space before the sentence. Silence, weaponized correctly, makes people nervous. Why? Because the brain hates uncertainty. And a long pause creates exactly that. When you don't respond immediately, The other person starts filling in the blanks. Did I say something wrong? Is he offended? Is she unimpressed? You've flipped the dynamic. You've made them start justifying themselves to you. And that's real power. Because it's not something you asked for. It's something they offered subconsciously. Now let's be clear. This isn't about being manipulative for sport. This is about reclaiming the energy that most people waste trying to be liked. You don't need to over-explain. You don't need to chase agreement. You don't need to soften your voice so others feel comfortable. You need to hold the frame. Strategic silence is your scalpel. It cuts through noise. It exposes insecurity. It repositions you without effort. And the more you use it, the more others start recalibrating around you. They pause before interrupting. They listen more carefully. They speak to impress, not to challenge. That's what Machiavelli understood before modern psychology ever had a name for it. Men judge more by the eye than by the hand. Because everyone sees you, but few come close enough to touch you. In other words, appearances win long before truth arrives. And when you master the pause, when you speak less but with precision, you don't just appear more powerful. You become it. Not by domination, but by design. That is cold strategy. You don't fight for the center. You control it by doing less and making each moment weigh more. There's a pattern, a deeply embedded behavioral loop that 90% of people live inside without ever realizing it. They speak quickly, laugh too easily, agree too often, and apologize for existing, not because they're bad people, but because they've been trained to believe that being accepted means being soft, being open, being constantly available. And society rewards that kind of behavior at first. But slowly, and then all at once, it starts to turn. The friend who always picks up the phone gets taken for granted. The employee who says yes to every task gets loaded with more without a raise. The partner who overextends emotionally ends up being the one who's left. Why? Because humans are wired to devalue what's always available. It's not cruelty. It's predictability. When you're always ready to explain, to smile, to please, you become legible. You become manageable. And in power dynamics, the manageable are not respected. They are used. This is the human pattern. We chase what is scarce. We value what is selective. We respect what doesn't flinch. Think about it. In movies, who do people fear and follow? The character who's always cracking jokes, begging for attention, or the one who sits still, speaks rarely, and watches everyone else unravel? People project power onto what they don't understand, and they lose interest in what they can predict. That's why most people get stuck in a loop of performance. They think, if I just explain myself better, they'll understand. If I just give more, they'll respect me. If I'm always there for them, they'll value me. But that's not how it works. The more you explain, the less they listen. The more you give, the less they respect. The more you're around, the more invisible you become. This is what Machiavelli would call a soft defeat. You don't even realize you've lost, because no one declared war. But the moment they stop taking you seriously, that war is already over. And the tragedy? You helped them win. You helped them put you in that box. With your over-explaining, with your emotional oversharing, with your desperate over-availability. But here's the turning point. The moment you stop playing that role, everything starts to shift. You stop replying instantly. You let calls go unanswered. You pause before saying yes. You remove your presence quietly, calmly, and people notice. Suddenly, they feel your absence. Suddenly, your silence becomes heavier than all your previous words combined. You've broken the pattern, not by being cruel, but by being clear, because clarity is power, and power, when paired with restraint, becomes irresistible. So the next time you feel the urge to fill the silence, to explain, to chase, remember, the moment you became predictable, you became forgettable. And the moment you became still, they had no choice but to adjust. You were taught all the wrong things. That kindness is always a virtue. That fast responses show competence. That vulnerability builds trust. That talking things through makes you more relatable. But here's the truth. Everything you were taught to be makes you easy to dismiss. In the world of strategy, the opposite is often true. Let's invert everything. You were taught, speak quickly to sound sharp. Machiavelli says, he who speaks fast reveals anxiety. The faster you talk, the more it signals one thing: you're trying to be accepted. And if you're trying to be accepted, you've already given the power away. You were taught, be open, be honest, share everything. Inversion, the less they know, the more they respect. Every time you overshare your thoughts, your emotions, your weaknesses, you become easier to predict. And once predictable, you become manageable. And once manageable, you're no longer a threat. But those who speak little, those who withhold, observe, then strike, they become forces people fear and follow. Look at Vladimir Putin. Look at Queen Elizabeth I. Look at Giorgio Armani, who built an empire with quiet elegance, barely giving interviews. They mastered the art of saying little, revealing nothing, but owning the room. Because what's rare becomes sacred. And what's sacred is never available on demand. You were taught, be polite, smile often, avoid conflict. Inversion, stop making yourself easy to digest. The more you polish your image to be digestible to others, the more they chew through your boundaries. Real power isn't rude, but it is unapologetic. You don't have to explain why you're silent. You don't need to justify your tone. You don't need to lower your volume so others feel tall. When Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The opinion of 10 men is of no value if none of them knows the truth," he was telling you, mass approval is worthless. The crowd is not the standard. Your internal frame is. That's what inversion is about. Flipping the narrative. Breaking the rules that were designed to keep you soft, obedient, and forgettable. The next time someone says, "You should smile more," don't. Not out of rebellion, but out of sovereignty. Because the smile that's expected holds no value, but the one they rarely see terrifies them. You weren't made to be digestible. You were made to be undeniable. So invert the norms. Refuse to perform. Withdraw just enough to make them miss you. Pause just long enough to make them uneasy. Speak just rarely enough that every word lands like a blade. That's how you rewrite your role in every room you walk into. Not by asking for respect, but by removing everything that made you invisible in the first place. There is a kind of presence that can't be faked. A gravity you feel the moment someone enters a room without saying a word. It's not because they're beautiful. It's not because they're rich. And it's definitely not because they're loud. It's because their silence is anchored. Most people use silence as a gap between words. But the rare ones, the ones who own every space they walk into, they use silence as a statement. They don't rush to fill awkwardness. They don't apologize for not speaking. They're not uncomfortable with stillness. They command it. That's the aura of silence. It's what happens when your stillness makes people fidget, when your quiet makes others question themselves, when your pause creates psychological tension. And here's the truth. People interpret your silence more powerfully than your words. Think of it like this. A loud man who brags is often ignored, but a quiet man who watches, he unsettles everyone. Why? Because silence becomes a mirror. People project their fears, their insecurities, their guilt onto you. Your stillness makes them feel seen without you doing a thing. This is why Machiavelli warned against being too accessible. Familiarity breeds contempt. Distance commands respect. Silence creates distance, but not physical, psychological. When you don't overshare, when you don't interrupt, when you don't rush to agree, people begin to wonder, what is he thinking? Is she judging me? Does he know something I don't? You become a question mark in a room full of exclamation points. And question marks have more power, because people fear what they can't read. And you, my friend, are no longer readable. Let me give you a modern example. In elite negotiations, high-stakes boardrooms, the person who speaks first loses. Why? Because the first to speak often reveals their position. But the one who pauses, they gather data, they watch reactions, they let others self-destruct, trying to fill the space. The power isn't in talking. The power is in making others talk first. The same applies socially. At a party, the loudest guy gets the laughs. But the one standing in the corner, calm, observing, silent, that's the one people feel drawn to without knowing why. He emits tension, mystery, presence. And here's the beauty. You don't need to fake it. You just need to withhold. Withhold your need to be understood. Withhold your need to be liked. Withhold your thoughts long enough to make others chase your perspective. Because when people have to work for your energy, they value it. They listen more closely. They speak more carefully. They try harder to impress you. That's not manipulation. That's energy discipline. And it's rare, which makes it powerful. So from this point on, don't just be silent. Radiate silence. Make your stillness louder than their noise. Make your pause heavier than their argument. Let your energy speak before your words do. Because when your silence carries weight, you no longer need to raise your voice to be respected. Let's make this real. You've heard the strategy. You've seen the pattern. Now it's time to test it in real life. Not tomorrow. Not after you finish this video. Today, here's your move. The next time someone asks you a question, whether it's a coworker, your boss, a friend, a stranger, pause, just for 3 seconds. Don't flinch. Don't smile nervously. Don't explain the pause. Just hold it. Let the silence stretch. Let them feel the tension. Let them wonder. And then, when you finally speak, do it slowly. Do it calmly. Do it as if your words cost money. Because when you ration your speech, it becomes more valuable. What will happen? At first, they might raise an eyebrow. They might shift in their seat. They might fidget or glance around. But then, they'll listen harder. Because you just changed the game. You've moved from reactive to dominant. From predictable to unreadable. And most importantly, you've made them wait. That one pause? That's your first signal of power. It tells the room, I'm not performing. I'm not seeking your approval. I'm setting the pace now. This is how leaders are made. Not through force. Not through noise. But through presence. Let me tell you something psychologists know but rarely say out loud. People respect what they have to adjust for. And silence is the most underused adjustment tool in existence. Think about it. The professor who waits before answering questions commands more focus. The CEO who pauses before giving feedback creates more weight behind their words. The parent who doesn't immediately react to a child's tantrum teaches discipline without yelling. The pause is your leverage. The pause is your pivot. The pause is your power. But you won't believe me until you feel it yourself. So here's the viral loop. Try this once. Just once. Hold the silence. Speak less. Speak slower. And watch how their energy shifts toward you. Then do it again. And again. And you'll start to realize something profound. You never needed to speak more to be respected. You only needed to create space for your value to be felt. Because when you control the space, you control the dynamic. When you control the tempo, you control the outcome. This is the kind of shift that doesn't just change a conversation. It changes how people treat you in every room you walk into. So start small. One pause. One controlled silence. One deliberate response. That's how it begins. And when you feel the shift, when you see the difference, You'll understand what Machiavelli meant when he said, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." Because the man who controls himself controls perception, and the man who controls perception controls everything. Here's what no one tells you. When you stay silent, they start talking to themselves. That's where the collapse begins. You think you need to speak to dominate a conversation, but the truth is, the less you say, the more others reveal. Why? Because most people are addicted to emotional feedback. They rely on your reactions to feel secure. They look for your approval to feel valid. They study your face, your tone, your micro-expressions to confirm they're still in control. Take that away, and the mask slips. In negotiation rooms, this is a known tactic. Let your counterpart keep speaking. Don't interrupt. Don't affirm. Don't resist. Just let silence sit in the air like a heavy fog. Eventually, they overcommit. They talk too much. They reveal weaknesses they never meant to share. They start justifying instead of demanding. That's collapse. And you caused it without saying a word. It happens in relationships too. You stop reacting. You stop over-explaining. You let them sit with their guilt, their betrayal, their excuses. At first, they'll push harder. They'll poke, provoke, escalate. Why? Because they're not used to emotional silence. They crave your anger, your defense, even your pain. Because all of that means you're still emotionally entangled. But when you offer nothing, they start to crumble. That's when they realize they can no longer reach you. And that's more terrifying than any argument. The collapse isn't loud. It's subtle. It's the look in their eyes when they realize you no longer need to prove anything. That kind of control, self-control, is so rare that it feels like power. Because it is. Psychologists call this emotional withdrawal. The ability to remove your validation and energy from someone without explanation or confrontation. It's not passive aggression. It's not manipulation. It's restraint. And restraint is power. Look at Stoics like Marcus Aurelius. He endured betrayal, pressure, and loss without letting emotion dictate his actions. Because he understood. You always have the option of having no opinion. And no opinion? That's untouchable. That's terrifying. That's elite self-command. When you don't flinch, you force the world to adjust to your stability. And people panic in the face of calm. Because calm is unreadable. And what they can't read, they can't control. So the next time someone tries to bait you into reaction, through insults, drama, or pressure, do nothing. Don't explain. Don't defend. Don't collapse. Let them collapse instead. Because the man who doesn't react emotionally forces everyone around him to face their own chaos. And most people aren't ready for that mirror. Power doesn't follow opinion. It follows principle. And principle has rules. Brutal, unspoken but constant. Break them, and you fade. Master them, and the world adjusts to you. Let's talk about one of the most underrated laws of power. Always say less than necessary. Law 4, The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. Why? Because the more you speak, the more you reveal. Your intentions, your doubts, your emotional temperature. But when you speak less strategically, you become harder to read, harder to corner, harder to control. This law wasn't invented by Greene. It was practiced by kings, emperors, generals, and billionaires. Louis XIV, the Sun King of France, ruled his entire court with calculated silence. He spoke rarely, listened obsessively, and when he did speak, every word felt sacred. People obsessed over interpreting him, and that uncertainty became his throne. Or consider Jeff Bezos, known for long pauses in meetings. He stares, waits, and then speaks in a whisper that carries more weight than someone shouting. Why does this work? Because silence creates tension. And in human psychology, tension, importance. If you speak too quickly, people assume you're eager to please. But when you slow down, when you let silence breathe, you imply, my words are worth the wait. And here's another law, straight from Machiavelli himself. It is much safer to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. Let that sink in. You've been taught to be lovable, to be liked, to be accepted. But Machiavelli didn't care about affection. He cared about influence. And nothing influences more consistently than controlled tension. Fear not in the sense of terror, but of uncertainty. Makes people second guess before disrespecting you. Think about the teacher you never talked back to, the boss you never interrupted, the friend who could say more with one glance than others could in a speech. They didn't need to dominate. They simply enforced presence. They mastered what Green calls strategic withdrawal, leaving just enough unsaid to become a mystery, holding just enough back to remain unchallenged. In the modern world, most people do the opposite. They overshare. They over-explain. They react instantly, and then wonder why no one respects them. It's not because they're weak. It's because they violated the law. So, here's your code moving forward. Speak half as much. Observe twice as hard. Pause before responding. Never reveal everything. Let silence do the work your voice can't. Let tension wrap your words in authority. Let restraint become your trademark. Because in the arena of power, the loud are replaceable, but the unreadable are unforgettable. And you don't want to be liked by everyone. You want to be remembered by the right ones. That's the difference between popularity and power. And power is never loud. Band annoy. Now picture this. You walk into a room, not with noise, not with bravado, but with the weight of someone who has nothing to prove. You don't try to charm. You don't force connection. You don't chase approval. You sit. You observe. And the room adjusts. Not because you said anything, but because you didn't. People glance at you longer than necessary. They pause before interrupting. They speak more carefully around you. You've become a presence, not a person who blends in, but a force that others orbit around quietly, respectfully, and often without knowing why. This is what happens. When you master your own energy, you stop being liked. You start being respected. And eventually, revered. This isn't a performance. This isn't charisma. This is command. And command isn't given. It's earned through restraint, through repetition, through discipline. Because while others drain themselves trying to be seen, you've become someone who can't be ignored. You don't just enter a space. You redefine it. Your silence carries memory. Your presence leaves a mark. In a world starving for attention, you offer rarity. In a culture obsessed with noise, you become the stillness that makes people nervous. And that nervousness? That's power. Not the kind that shouts. Not the kind that demands. But the kind that says, without words, I know who I am. And I don't need your permission to be it. Imagine what happens when you live like that. In your work, in your relationships, in every room you enter. People stop playing games with you. They stop testing your boundaries. They stop assuming you'll always be available. Because they now understand you're not like the others. You don't give access cheaply. You don't waste words. You don't lower your standards to make others feel comfortable. You've set the tempo, and those who can't move with it fall away. Good. Let them. Because the room you belong in isn't built on volume. It's built on vibration. And when your energy is precise, anchored, and disciplined, you don't have to ask for a seat at the table. You are the table. This is your legacy. Not the person who tried to be understood. Not the one who chased applause. But the one who taught the world. Stillness is not absence. It's authority. The one who proved, through every glance, every pause, every silence, that the most powerful presence in any room is the one that says the least, but makes everyone else to shift. Let's end this the same way power does. Quietly, without explanation, without apology. Because if you've made it this far, you already feel it. The shift. You no longer crave to be liked. You no longer feel the urge to fill the silence. You no longer feel smaller when you don't speak. You've crossed a threshold. From being noise to becoming presence. From reacting to choosing your response like a weapon. From proving to simply existing as the standard. And here's the final truth you need to walk away with. You don't need to convince anyone to respect you. You only need to stop tolerating those who don't. The moment you withdraw your energy from chaos, from insecurity, from people who only understand you when you shrink, you create space. Space for clarity, for precision, for power. And in that space, you build a version of yourself that no longer asks for permission to exist. You command time by controlling your tempo. You command perception by saying less. You command energy by being unavailable to anything that drains you. That is the final move. Not louder, not bigger, not more, but less, sharper. Still, you don't have to burn bridges. You simply stop crossing them. You don't have to prove your worth. You become it in silence. Because what people don't expect is what they fear. They expect you to explain. They expect you to react. They expect you to beg for understanding. But instead, you offer nothing. You nod. You leave. You rise. That's the Machiavellian way. No dramatics. No declarations. Just a clean, deliberate removal of your presence from any place. That doesn't recognize your value before you speak. And when you walk out of that room, when you withhold that reply, when you leave that message unread, not out of spite, but out of sovereignty, you'll feel something no one can fake. Peace. The kind that comes from finally choosing yourself. Not loudly, but completely. So let others chase attention. Let them fill their feeds with noise. Let them burn themselves out performing for an audience that never claps loud enough. You speak when it matters. You pause when it counts. You vanish when it's time. And when you return, if you choose to, you come back as the storm they never saw coming. Because power doesn't need to announce itself. It enters. It observes. It pauses. And the world shifts. Now go. Don't explain. Don't overthink. Just remember, the next time you walk into a room, you're not there to be seen. You're there to be felt.